Hello and welcome to the Ego Chall Podcast. This is episode 30. Who would have thought that we would actually make it 30 episodes? Probably Bink, maybe not me. My name is Preston Byers. It's been a while, so I don't really know how my intro usually went. But yeah, I'm Preston Byers, and I'm joined, as always, by my co host, Justin Binkowski. And today we're going to kind of get back into the groove of things, try to go over some of the news around the Call of Duty League that obviously probably came up in the last month and a half since we last did an episode. And we're just going to go over some of the stuff that maybe we did touch on at some point and it got confirmed over the last month and a half. How you doing, Bink? Well, apparently you were muted for most of that because I had to refresh my OBS and it uh, I don't know, Mike just pointed out in the chat, and I look at the OBS and it's not moving, but now it is. So
Am
I
I
don't
good?
know. Yeah, you're good. I don't really know what happened there because it was on the same exact setting and everything. Like I haven't changed anything in 2 months, so I'm not
Huh.
too sure what happened there. But thank you, Mike, for pointing that out in the Twitch chat. Um, yeah, I don't know what happened there. So
Long
uh,
story short, summed up version of what I was saying. I apologize for the bad lighting for anybody who's watching the video format of this, and we got some Call of Duty to talk about, and I'm excited to be back.
Yeah. I mean, this is just signs that this podcast is cursed. Your light bulb blew out and my stuff is muted. I couldn't get into the Twitch account earlier because I had forgot the password or something, so I had to try to figure it out there. So a lot of things are a little bit different, but we're gonna keep chugging along. I think the biggest news, and we should talk about it right off the top, is something that actually happened this week and something that we had been talking about kind of through the reports and the rumors over the past few months. But OpTic Texas was officially confirmed this week. It is a partnership of sorts between OpTic, which is now owned by Hex, and he is partnering with Envy, which is owned. I don't know if it's still owned, but it was founded by Hastro. And these two incredible organizations in Call of Duty have partnered to create OpTic Texas, and their roster is a blend of the OpTic Chicago roster from last season and the Dallas Empire roster from last season. So you have Shotzi and Illy, who played on the Empire in the 2020 and 2021 season, and then you have Scump and Dashy, who played for OpTic in last season as well. I guess let's just talk about like what your reaction is. We have talked about this topic in the past, and on paper, I guess we get to see them a little more in action now that Vanguard is officially out and these teams are playing in tournaments and whatnot. What do you think about this roster? What do you think about this entire partnership with OpTic Texas forming?
Yeah, I really have a lot of thoughts on this. It's obviously, like you kind of said, it's the biggest topic we've had in terms of COD competitive news recently, or even just during this WrestleMania period. Um, I can see this perspective from I can see this angle from multiple perspectives just on the overall topic of the merger. On one hand, it's super interesting to see Hex and Hastro team up. We've talked about it before, and it's been talked about a little bit recently too, with mentioning a past partnership with Eon Interactive, I believe it was, way back in the day between OpTic and Envy. It was a little different though. Now this is actually a merger of the companies. So on one hand, we've kind of seen it before, and it's cool that they're working together. But on the other hand, you see the end of one of the greatest rivalries in Call of Duty esports between OpTic and Envy. So will be interesting to see what the overall community reaction to it is. I guess obviously you have the green wall; they're gonna follow them over, and they should undoubtedly be the most popular team just from a viewership and fandom perspective. And well, when you look at the roster, it's just on paper super talented, really solid. I would be on paper I would expect them to be a really strong search and destroy team. I mean, just technically based on, you have the two S&D stars there in Dashi and Illy, and I guess you would technically say Scump might be considered the worst S&D player on the team, which isn't even like bad because Scump had a really good year last year and he was really good in S&D in particular. So that's something I'm going to be interested to see is how they perform in search throughout this year. But I'm just excited to see this team in action. Like you said, we're getting to see some kickoffs and stuff. Not really putting too much weight into that just yet because Vanguard hasn't even been out a week yet. But we'll start to see some action in the coming days and weeks, and we'll actually get to see how this roster is performing in the earlier goings.
Another part of this partnership and the OpTic brand being separated from NRG Esports is that the Chicago Call of Duty League slot is now owned by this partnership between MV and OpTic. It is no longer owned by NRG, who operated the Chicago Huntsmen in the inaugural season of the Call of Duty League, and then operated OpTic Chicago last season. So it is the onus is on Hex and Hastro and those guys to complete the sale and find a potential suitor to come into the league and replace them as the 12th team. We had talked about this before we went on our break, and it was still kind of up in the air about what was going to happen with that 12th spot. We had known about the OpTic Envy stuff, but there was a report by our very own Jacob Wolf and Crone, and they were talking about how Washington Esports Ventures, who owns the Washington Justice in the Overwatch League, that they were advancing in talks to buy NRG at the time, buy NRG's spot in the Call of Duty League and relocate that team to Washington, D.C., and, we memed about it, talking about it would be the Washington Call of Duty team or whatever. And then I guess people found out the potential names of like the Demon Cats or whatever it was. So that actually fell through. The deal with Washington Esports Ventures coming into the league and potentially relocating a team to DC, that fell through. I actually wrote that article. That might have been my first .esports article in like, I don't know, 6 months or whatever. But this was a report by actually a Twitter user named Unscripted. He reported it first, but he reported that Washington Esports Ventures, the parent company of the Overwatch League team Washington Justice, have pulled out of discussions to acquire the Call of Duty League slot owned by NRG Esports. And he kind of speculated that there is a greater than 0% chance that the CDL will go forward with 11 teams in the 2022 season. Jacob Wolf, who works for Esports, he said that's more just an assumption, but there was at least one more team other than Washington Esports Ventures that were in talks to buy the Chicago slot. So we don't know who that team is or that organization or whatever, but hopefully they buy that slot. What did you think about this news that Washington Esports Ventures had backed out of conversations to buy a CDL slot?
Yeah, and just real quick on the OpTic front, that's actually like there were two curveballs there with this official confirmation. And that was the first one was the name, right? Most people were under the assumption it was going to be OpTic Dallas. Turns out it's OpTic Texas. I heard rumblings about the possibility of OpTic Texas a couple days before the announcement, but that was kind of surprising to a lot of people in the community, I feel like. And the other bigger surprising factor of the announcement was the fact that now Envy OpTic do own that 12th spot. I guess like when you think about it a little bit, it makes sense from a business perspective that, if OpTic or Envy is acquiring the OpTic brand, they would probably pay more to acquire that spot, I guess. I don't really know how that would work. But I mean, after thinking about it, it doesn't like not make sense. Double negative, but whatever. Regardless, that was certainly interesting. And now we're in this situation, like you said, where we had reportedly heard Washington was pursuing that spot or in negotiations, and now it falls through. So, the biggest thing for me in this regard is just finding out at the end of the day what the CDL is going to do. It really wouldn't make sense to me if we only had 11 teams in the league next year, just like from a format perspective and everything. I feel like it would just make things a lot more complicated. But we're going to have to see what happens, and NV OpTic are going to have to work to find somebody to purchase that slot. I feel like it shouldn't really be that difficult, but while I'm saying that, it is obviously, a multi-million-dollar purchase, so there's a lot of stuff that goes into it that I know nothing about, so I'm not going to say that it's something easy, but I feel like we've heard, like, Rise Nation has talked in the past about being interested in expansion. Cloud9 was, like, teasing some stuff on Twitter earlier in Roster Mania about the CDL, so obviously we're not too sure how serious that was, but there has been interest or seeming interest from multiple organizations in the past, and it will be interesting to see if this new OpTic NV merged company, whatever you want to call it, is able to find a partner so that we can have 12 teams for the CDL at least for the start of 22, which is kind of just crazy to think about because we've been talking about expansion last couple of years, and now there's a chance that we have less teams instead of more or the same.
Yeah, that is a pretty crazy thought. I think COVID obviously had a great deal to do with it.
Yeah.
I don't know if teams would have been interested otherwise, but I think teams probably were definitely not as interested as they would have been. Another thing about the name that you brought up, the OpTic Texas name instead of it being OpTic Dallas. I've seen people speculate, and I want to emphasize that word speculate, that the reason that it is OpTic Texas and not OpTic Dallas is that whatever team they could be selling, OpTic and Envy could be selling that slot to, is more interested in marketing themselves as the Dallas team. So, Complexity, for example, who is owned by the Dallas Cowboys and has like a very obvious history in Call of Duty esports as one of the greatest dynasties of all time and multiple championships and a world championship. Since they're owned by the Cowboys and they have that connection to the city of Dallas, that could be an option, and they could be interested in, they don't want to be in whatever Boston, or they don't want to be in Chicago, or whatever city, name a city in the United States. They don't want to do that. They would rather be in Dallas. And I don't know. I think that is interesting. I don't know if it's true, but I would love to see Complexity come back in. They seem like I know Tim the Tapman, who signed as a content creator for Complexity, I think last month maybe. My timeline's all screwed up now, but he said on his stream that he had been urging Complexity to become a part of the CDL because he's a Call of Duty guy at heart, and he plays a lot of Warzone. He originally was really interested in the competitive scene before he became like one of the biggest streamers in the world. I'm not sure if it's actually going to happen, but I do think that it's an interesting theory that Complexity or another team. There are a lot of teams that would probably be interested in Dallas, considering a ton of the pros in the CDL live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and it just kind of makes sense to set up base there, that they would be interested in marketing themselves as the sole Dallas team in the CDL.
Yeah, I think that's pure speculation or a rumor at this point. Mainly because Dexerto had an interview with Hex and Hastro posted after the merger was announced. And I will read this quote off real quick. It's a quote from Hastro. He says, "We don't own the whole Texas market right now because there's no other CDL team in Texas. We can market all over the state. We did get Austin, though, so we own Dallas, Austin, and Oklahoma City. We're OpTic Texas because we think incorporating Austin in that way makes a ton of sense. We were both born here in Texas, and OpTic is bigger than Dallas, so let's spread our footprint as wide as we can." So with OpTic Dallas or OpTic Texas, OpTic/Envy, God, that's gonna be confusing. With that merged company owning, having the rights to Dallas, I guess Complexity would have to purchase just the Dallas rights from OpTic. I don't really know how that would work or anything. So, um, certainly, I mean, I would obviously enjoy seeing Complexity back in Call of Duty. They're a legacy brand and a name for longtime Call of Duty fans that's easily recognizable, and a lot of people consider one of the greatest teams of all time with the Cold Dynasty. So it'd be exciting. I just don't know how likely it is at this point. And real quick too, just on that note, of Dallas, because OpTic Texas is now confirmed. Not only is OpTic Chicago as a brand being retired, but so is Dallas Empire. And I just wanted to throw that out there because I think Dallas Empire grew on me as one of the coolest brands in the CDL since the league's inception. I thought it was a really cool name. I thought it was cool how they incorporated the envy into like the crown of the logo to still have envy involved when they weren't able to just be like Dallas Envy or whatever. So on one hand, I'm sad to see Dallas Empire leave, but it certainly is interesting that now we have this. I'm not going to say juggernaut because that's the complexity thing, I think, or maybe it was Cloud9 and Counter-Strike, I don't know. But, we now have like this super powered partnership between OpTic and Envy with OpTic Texas.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. I think, was it Jim in our group chat said that is everyone a OpTic Texas fan now? And
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are definitely going to be OpTic Texas fans because, like you touched on, there are just a ton of OpTic fans, and Dallas is like before the merger, they were probably like maybe the third, fourth most popular team. Like I'm thinking FaZe and Thieves and OpTic maybe as the top three, but definitely like a top four most popular team. And to combine those, especially with how like interconnected they are with Call of Duty esports over the years, it just makes sense that they would have just a gigantic and very passionate fan base. Yeah, so I think it'll be interesting. I also found that tweet by the Mutineers pretty interesting, where they basically hyped up FaZe's roster and just that was pretty stupid. But I mean, that social media manager wanted some impressions, and he definitely got it.
Oh, he got him, yeah.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I still think it's too early to do any power rankings for these teams. Just because like Vanguard's been out 5 days now, we haven't really seen all the teams play too much aside from these like kickoff search tourneys. So it would be kind of dumb, in my opinion, to do a power ranking just like speculatively before we actually see some action. But just on paper, talent alone, I feel like OpTic Texas is a top 3 team on paper because I would have Envy at 1, or sorry, FaZe at 1. Toronto at 2, and then OpTic Texas at 3. I think FaZe is undisputed at 1. You could maybe argue for that number 2 spot between Toronto and OpTic, but we've actually seen that Toronto roster in action last year. They stuck together. They had a good year last year. So that's where my head's at. But again, not going to do any power rankings just yet. We can maybe do that down the road.
Yeah, definitely down the road. I know that Crone did his power rankings where he asked all of those coaches and players before the last season, and they turned out to be fairly accurate with who are going to be some of the worst teams in the league and who are going to be some of the best. But we won't really know until a month or two from now when teams start to practice all the time and get used to everything, and the rule set becomes kind of set in stone. So we'll see then. Let's talk about some of these moves that have happened since we were gone. Something that actually just happened is Atlanta FaZe signing a substitute. They signed Prestini, Arcidy's twin brother. He is the new substitute for the Atlanta FaZe. He was on the Seattle Surge roster last season, and he was on Florida and Chicago in the 2020 season. I thought this was interesting. Obviously, Sibilance, who was their substitute last season, or FaZe's substitute, excuse me, he is on the Seattle roster now. So they kind of had to do something with the substitute spot. They could have put Crowder or RJ in there if they really wanted to, not pick up another player. But it's interesting that Prestini is getting this role. What do you think about Prestini joining FaZe?
I think it makes a lot of sense. Obviously, like you said, twin brothers with Arcides. He also teamed with Arcides, Simp, and Abizi during Black Ops 4 on United on the team that won CoD champs. And the playoffs before that in Miami. I forget what the exact event is called. But regardless, he has that connection with these guys. Yeah. He has that pre-existing connection and chemistry with these guys. And if anything super dramatic or some emergency pops up with Atlanta FaZe, Prestini could be a serviceable sub for this team. I feel like he could, barring something happening to Arcides, I feel like he can come in and play either sub or, in an emergency situation, be like a flex AR. So I think of like the potential subs that Atlanta could have signed, unless they went for like some underrated amateur player or something like that. I just think this move makes a lot of sense. At the end of the day, we probably won't see Prestini playing for Atlanta FaZe. I would be surprised if we do, but you never know. So, like you said, Atlanta could have went down that route of having a coach be a sub, but they haven't done that in the past. So it makes sense that they have a player to be their sub just in case.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised just because I really wasn't even thinking about FaZe's subs because, I mean, if they need their sub, then obviously an emergency has happened and it's just kind of out of their control. And if it was an emergency and it was performance related, probably not going to use that substitute anyway. I feel like they would be one of those teams to go out and spend the money to acquire, like, if there was like a Vivid from last season who's just kind of sitting on the bench doing nothing for another team. I feel like FaZe would be one of those teams to go out, spend the money to acquire a player to bring them in and try to assimilate them into their own roster. But yeah, I think I agree with you. I think this is a very good chemistry move, because Prestini has all of these connections within the team, and a substitute is kind of just another set of eyes and ears for a team now, especially if they're not expected to contribute in a really meaningful way on game days. So congratulations to Prestini, and I guess he could still play challengers, so he has that option, but he's still going to be paid CDL minimum, I'm assuming. So congratulations to him. And yeah, Florida also. So we didn't talk about this with the Washington stuff, but Washington, because Washington Esports Ventures backed out of discussions to acquire a CDL slot, the rumored roster that they had, reportedly started to, they'd obviously didn't sign them, but they were thinking about signing them. It reportedly was Vivid, TJ Haley, Methods, and Paulex. So that's an interesting roster, especially Vivid, because we had talked quite a bit about him at the end of the season because we didn't really know what was going to happen with Dallas, and I thought that he would fit perfectly with Florida. I think I said Crimin Vivid to Florida, but he was going to be on this Washington roster, and when the Washington roster kind of fell apart, he is ultimately being signed by Florida. He has been officially signed by Florida. He signed on November 4th. And Florida, because they had 6 players with Vivid signing, they decided to release Havoc, who played for them both seasons, 2020 and 2021. He started on the bench at the beginning of last season, and then he was brought up to replace Slacked in the middle of the season. Um, I thought that was interesting. I really thought that Yeez would be the odd man out because he was slotted for a substitute role when he signed his extension this offseason, and he hasn't played a CDL match, and Havoc has experience with this roster and these players. So I thought Havoc would stay on board and Yeez would be the odd man out. What do you think about that? What do you think about Havoc being the odd man out with Vivid coming in?
So Havoc actually clarified he was talking on stream about the situation, and he explained on Twitter that it was kind of like a mutual decision. It was also his partially his decision, because he tweeted, "This was not me just not wanting to live in Florida instead of moving to play online challengers at a disadvantage while waiting for someone to maybe do bad enough to get replaced. I'm choosing to stay in Texas to become the best challenger player and get back in the league on my own terms. They, as in Florida, they are choosing to cut me because of this decision. I'm completely confident that betting on myself will pay off. I'll earn my spot back again, like I've always done." So, partially seems like a mutual decision, maybe, a little bit back and forth here. But at the end of the day, it seems like, Havoc didn't want to sit on the bench and I think it sounds like Mutineers are having everybody move down to Florida to compete from the team's headquarters and stuff there. So he's thinking he'll have a better chance if he just plays challengers from Texas and is on his own instead of under a CDL org. So betting on himself. I've always thought Havoc is a smart, good S&D player. So he has a good year in challengers. We could see him back in the CDL eventually. Maybe this year if somebody needs a midseason pickup, or even in the future with hopeful expansion eventually.
I with Havoc's reasoning, I'm thinking like when are teams really going to force players to start playing in their home cities? Like some teams do already. We saw the Gorillas last season. Everybody was in LA, and Atlanta I think was like all phase was in Atlanta, but uh what was it? I think maybe it was the Dallas Morning News. They reported at some point that there were more than 20 players in the CDL located in the Dallas Fort Worth area, which is, my math is probably not great, but nearly half of the league, if they're all starters. I'm not sure. But that's a considerable percentage of the entire league is located in one area. Um, I don't think that obviously New York isn't mandating that their players go there because I know Clay is still down in Texas and whatnot. So I, my thing is like, when are teams gonna start just like, COVID is less of an issue in a lot of places. I'm assuming, and if events are on land this season, which we don't really know, we haven't been given any indication that they are, but you would assume that there will be several lands at the minimum. Would a team like New York, or I don't know, like, yeah, I guess New York or LA Thieves or Seattle, would they say, hey, you guys should move out here and start playing for us here so we can kind of set up operations here? What do you think?
I think it's already happening. I believe LA Thieves are moving out to LA. I'm pretty sure Octane had said it, and I think that was part of the reason Kenny wasn't playing in the kickoffs, or
Okay.
maybe like I can't even remember if he
I
actually
did
did
see
or
that
not.
he was moving, but I wasn't sure if that was like moving from a Dallas apartment to another Dallas apartment or
Yeah,
what was
so
going
so I
on there.
believe the Thieves are moving to play out of LA. I believe Florida is, based on stuff from Havoc, and I think even Vivid was like saying that he was moving down there. Could be wrong on that, but I believe it's starting to happen. And again, like you pointed out, we don't know the format for next year, but it does make sense if we are starting to pivot away from online play. We might not need all the teams to be in that same Texas area. If there are still elements of online play, it'll be interesting to see what happens based on where the teams are located. Now that I'm thinking about it, I think maybe even Seattle is having the players out in Seattle, but I'm not 100% sure. I'll
I
have
know
to
that
look into it.
Paris last season was they at least a few of them. I don't know if the entire team was in one location, but
Paris was in Texas last year. Yeah.
yeah, and I didn't hear that. I heard that it wasn't a great environment, so I don't know if it would be to those players' benefit to be put up in whatever kind of shack that Paris is renting out for the season. But I know that Toronto has done it, and we even saw in the 2020 season with Classic where he went from Toronto back to New York for supposed family thing, and then he wasn't allowed to practice or play because he wasn't in Toronto. I think like that is going to probably become more commonplace within the league, because you would assume that the coaches and the analysts and the team operations people, they're all located in one area, and it's easier to keep players accountable, where we've seen players just sleep through the entire day, not get on for scrims and whatnot. So it'll be interesting to see if these teams start mandating that their players move across the country or wherever.
Yep. And at the end of the day, it's just going to come down to, whether they actually need to compete in the legit matches from there. Scrimming, there'll always be issues with ping and stuff uh online for scrims and practice until, maybe we get to the point where CDL teams have like academy teams or like, a minor league affiliate team that they can practice against instead of the other teams. But then you get questions of the effectiveness of practice and all that. But regardless, I feel like we're moving in that direction where a lot of these teams are starting to, play out of their actual home cities, barring except like Paris and London, which just wouldn't make sense with the current format of the league for them to be competing from Europe for scrims.
Yeah. This was something that Crone reported before we took our break and we talked about, but it finally got confirmed. The New York Subliners roster is Clayster, Crimsix, Neptune, and Hydra. Neptune was bought out by the Florida Mutineers, or from the Florida Mutineers, and Crimsix was acquired from the Dallas Empire. Hydra and Clay are staying over from the 2020 roster. So Mac went to the Seattle Surge and Asim went to the Los Angeles Guerrillas. I guess kind of final thoughts on this roster now that it has officially been confirmed.
Yeah, I think in the past we've talked about this lineup multiple times now since it was reported by Crone. The biggest thing for me is going to come down to their effectiveness in whatever the meta ends up shaping up to be in Vanguard. We saw, a lot on Twitter has been talked about that like duo card of Clay and Clem, how successful they've been as a duo. And at the end of the day, it's going to come down to what the meta of Vanguard is like. If it's looking like it's a 3 MP40 meta, how is Krim going to be able to handle running that third sub? We've seen it in the past, haven't really seen it from him in recent years, though. So that would be interesting. And then on the flip side, if we run into a situation where there's multiple STGs or automatons being used for ARs, who would be a third AR for this New York team? You also have questions with how will Neptune and Hydra work out as a sub duo? Will they both be too aggressive, or will they be able to figure out the pacing? Just some questions surrounding this roster for me. I'm not gonna write them off or anything just yet because I obviously want to see them in action. But super talented roster on paper. Just gonna be excited to see what they're able to do.
There are some pretty obvious comparisons to be made between this New York lineup and the 2020 Dallas lineup. It's not 5v5, but Clay and Krim are there, and then if you just delete Hook from the roster, you have Shotzi and Illy, and Neptune and Hydra are both really young, talented players. Neptune comes from Halo, like Krim was a very accomplished Halo player. Hydra, if Insight simply just didn't exist, he probably would have been Rookie of the Year last year. Definitely one of the, just from a pure talent standpoint, one of the most impressive players in the entire league, and I think it's just a very interesting lineup. I agree with you. It's kind of you have to wait and see with this team because there are some role issues, or there at least could be, but there's a lot of potential. I think the ceiling is very high with this team because you have Clay and Krim, who are two of literally the best Call of Duty players ever, and Hydra and Neptune have a lot of talent, but they still have to win championships and get some experience. So it should be a very interesting lineup for New York.
Yeah, and just to clarify real quick, we can talk about Vanguard at the end of the show. At least that's what I was planning. But in these early days, it seems like the most popular guns right now are the MP40 for the sub, and then the STG and the Automaton for ARs. So in a world where it's a 2 AR, 2 sub meta, this team makes perfect sense, right? And then we really don't have any questions besides from maybe like the pacing of Neptune and Hydra working together. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's really just going to come down to what the meta is like, how they're able to uh, figure stuff out from there. But obviously, they have that veteran talent and leadership between Clay and Krim. So if anyone's able to make it work, regardless of what gun ends up being in their hands, it can definitely be those two guys.
Yeah. I'm going to run through some rosters that we've talked about at length, and we don't really need to discuss it really much at all. Los Angeles Guerrillas, their roster this season is going to be Slasher, Hook, Gunless, and Asim. Minnesota Rocker, their roster, Attach, Standy, Priesta, and Major Maniac. They're running back their roster from the 2021 season. The LA Thieves, Octane, Envoy, Kenny, and Draza. The Ultra are bringing back all four of their players, Kleenex, Insight, Cammy, and Bance, and they're signing Hixie as their substitute. And they still had Methods on their roster, but he was a part of that rumored Washington roster, so they were, hoping to, sell him off or something or trade him. And then the Seattle Surge, their roster, Accuracy, Mac, Sib, and Pred, who is probably going to be the only APAC player in the league this year, or at least to start the season. And let me just talk about this London stuff. We don't really have any updates, and it hasn't been confirmed. But Crone reported this on September 3rd that Zero, Nasty, and Gizmo, along with Afro, who has already been re-signed, and he's presumably going to be on that London roster. So Zero, Nasty, and Gizmo were at the top of London, the Royal Ravens wish list. So that was 2 months ago. Wow. So yeah, nothing's really been confirmed, although Astro was seen playing with Gizmo and Nasty recently, so take that as you will, but nothing confirmed on that end. And we might as well just talk about Paris real quick as well. The rumored roster is Fellow, Temp, Decimate, and John. So it looks like Temp, who was, I think he's the only holdover from Paris's roster from the end of the season. Decimate was briefly on Seattle
Seattle, New York, yep.
Seattle, yeah, and then subbed in for New York. John, who played for the LA Thieves, and Fellow, who pretty briefly played for the Empire as a starter. So pretty interesting roster, a lot of veteran experience there. We don't really need to talk about all those confirmed rosters, but Paris is something new and something that we haven't been able to talk about because we actually had no idea what direction that they were going to go in. We were talking about maybe they go for an all-French lineup, like, sign like Whalers and a bunch of other French players, or go with the Challengers lineup and try to build up like some young, really unknown players. But Fellow, Temp, Decimate, and John, what do you think of that?
Yeah, again, that's just a rumor from Crone at this point as a possible roster, so we don't know for sure if it's what we'll see from Paris. They were last year one of the last teams to announce their roster. Officially, it looks like they're going down a similar route again this year. But for me, just the big question with seeing those four names there is who's going to be the main AR. You have Decimate and John as your sub duo, and then it'll come down to Fellow or Temp for the main AR. Neither of them is really a main AR. They're both kind of flexes in my opinion. I would assume that Temp would be the main AR in this scenario. But again, that's just speculation. Wouldn't really know for sure. But I mean, obviously there's talent on that team. There would be some good search knowledge between Fellow and Decimate in particular. They're both pretty good search players. And Temp has definitely been decent at search in the past too. So, this isn't a team that jumps out and screams powerhouse to me right away, but it certainly seems like on paper that it could be a somewhat competitive middle of the pack team if everything works out for them. But we'll have to wait until Paris actually confirms what they're doing.
And also, with this 12th team being really up in the air and about whether there will be a 12th team, I sure hope there will be, but since it hasn't been confirmed and we're not entirely sure, I mean, players could end up on that 12th team if Cloud9 or Rise or Complexity or whoever, they swoop in, they buy that slot, and they want to build a roster. Um, you know, like there might be some players from these rumored rosters that haven't really signed contracts and they might leave for another team, or some challengers players or players that are going to end up in challengers if there isn't another team. They might get their chance, which is it's interesting. I know Methods was pretty disappointed, if that's the right word, about Washington breaking up, but I don't know. Like that's a very weird scenario. It doesn't really happen in traditional sports where you're worried about if a bunch of players are going to be out of work or in the minor leagues because one team is just going to not exist anymore. That's more like XFL stuff, not like NFL stuff. But I hope there are 12 teams, and that would add at least four players, hopefully five or more with the substitutes. But it's just something that we're gonna have to see in the future.
Yep, that's the main takeaway for me too. Kind of hinted at it earlier, but I would just be very surprised if we only see 11 teams. I would, however, before we had the confirmation of OpTic Texas or OpTic/Envy now owning that Chicago spot, before we had that, and it seemed like NRG was still in control of the spot, it made more sense to me that, like, okay, the league isn't going to be like NRG just can't, field the team. They're not there. They would, I feel like the CDL would force NRG to at least put a minimum salaried roster out there to compete and have 12 teams. But now that OpTic Envy officially owns that 12th spot, they can't have two teams owned by, the same organization. So that's where things get a little tricky. So I guess now knowing who actually controls that 12th spot, it is more likely in my head, or how do I want to say it? I could see a world where there would be 11 teams more easily than I could before. But I still think that would be super weird. It would mess up the format. I wouldn't be a fan of it. I just think we got to have our fingers crossed and hope OpTic Envy are able to find a partner, get a org in that 12th spot, and then we get another team to get the league to at least what we've had the last 2 years. And on the Washington front, like you mentioned, I definitely feel for Methods. When the rumors were going around, it seemed like Methods was going to be on the Washington team. I was super excited for him to be back in the league just because he's a super entertaining guy and a really good personality to have in the league. And I feel like he's one of those guys that, like, a new team, if an org does enter the CDL, Methods is like one of the type of guys you want to have on your team to, build around, in the sense of he's a strong AR player, but he also can deliver in content and try to help you build a fan base if you're just, like you're that org just starting out in the CDL. So hopefully we, OpTic Envy finds that partner, gets a new org in for the 12th spot, and maybe that mystery org ends up going down the route of signing Methods and we get him back in the league.
Yeah, it's definitely in the best interest of everybody, and especially OpTic and Envy to sell that spot because they get money for that spot and presumably a lot of it. Um, I don't know if they're going to get the asking price that was reported when all the other teams were getting into the CDL, before the inaugural season, but you know, at least a few million would probably be nice for them. And it's just like it's very weird. It's a very weird situation, and I agree with you that the CDL probably has been very like watching this very closely and looking at NRG selling their spot and then ending up with OpTic and Envy. They're probably like, okay, you guys really need to sell this spot. Like there isn't a lot of other options other than even if you have to take less money than you probably thought you were going to take. Like we need 12 teams. Like it just from a an optics standpoint, no pun intended. Like it doesn't look good for the league to lose a team after the second season of play. Like that, it just is not a very good, not a very good look for everybody involved. But hopefully we don't have to come to that reality, and there will be a 12 team, and they all sign four or more players, and we'll act like this never happened. Let's talk about Vanguard. I seen you put in the notes PSOG's in-depth analysis of the game so far. I think
Yep.
there was a typo somewhere.
Nope.
I know that you need my editing skills, but I think that is a major typo on your part,
Nope.
and it needs to be corrected. Um, what do you think of Call of Duty Vanguard, which released over the weekend?
I want to hear what you think because I've heard per sources that you've been absolutely grinding. You hit third prestige at like 2 a.m. on Saturday, and you've just been, loving the game.
Faded Jim was your source, and I definitely did not tell him that. Um, well,
But
from a viewer standpoint, which I've watched a few like streams and like clips and everything, so I haven't been watching the game too much because I mean it's just I don't know like I don't just sit there at home and watch Scump all day and watching tournaments, but I have watched a few streams and I think it looks all right. I mean I'm not a real fan of the Modern Warfare feel because I didn't really like I liked watching Cold War more than Modern Warfare, and I don't really like the style of gameplay, but I do enjoy the aesthetic of World War II more than the aesthetic that MW had a few years ago. So it does look a little bit better in terms of maps. I mean, I could see some interesting maps. I think once you've seen them for 3 or 4 months, so by the time that the CDL season probably starts, I'll be sick and tired of at least three maps because they get played all the time. But right now, I think things are fine. I think that from a fan's perspective, I think a lot of the players seem to be a little more optimistic about this season in terms of gameplay than like last season or 2 seasons ago. I don't see as much complaining online, which maybe that's something that the CDL has told them to cut back on. But that it seems like there is less complaining and whining about what's going on in the game. But from someone who has actually played the game and you're a quote unquote grinder, what do you think about Vanguard and competitive specifically in Vanguard right now?
yeah, so if the head Ego Chall correspondent Tremor is still in the stream, and we
He
can get
is.
if we can get a statement on the competitive side of the game from him, that would be
Has Tremor
interesting to
played
get his
300
take.
GBs yet? Because
Not quite 300, but he has been playing GBs. I haven't played any competitive yet, so I really don't have anything to say about that. I know he's been talking about it though. If he wants to provide a statement in chat that we can say and he can give his take, that would be a good angle to get. I know there have been some glitches and stuff with Search and Destroy that people I had seen complaints from. But again, game hasn't even been out a week yet. There's supposedly going to be an update on Thursday for the game that might address some of the early issues for the game. So we'll have to see what happens. But like I said, haven't really played any competitive yet, but I have really enjoyed pubs so far in this game, which is super surprising for me to say because I haven't enjoyed playing pubs in any of the recent Call of Duty titles. Really, I've done it and played pubs just because I haven't really had anything better to do than some of these other games. But I've had a lot of fun so far playing, and I don't really know. We usually have a squad of 4 or 5 other guys playing, which probably makes it a little more fun than if I was just playing solo. But so far I've enjoyed it. The one example for me that sticks out the most is obviously World at War was the first Call of Duty that I actually owned. I played Big Red 1 on my cousin's GameCube, and I played CoD 4 at a friend's house. Before that, before I actually owned a 360 in World at War, but that was the first game I actually owned. And it's one of my favorite from a casual perspective. And with Vanguard, they added in Castle and Dome as remakes from World at War, and those are two really my favorite maps of all time. I enjoyed both of those, over 10 years ago, and I enjoy it again now. But the big thing for me is just like when I first loaded into Castle. Obviously, it's a big difference between those 360 graphics in 2010 or my PS5 now in 2021. But just the difference, and I literally said like, "Wow, Castle just looks beautiful now," and I was kind of like blown away by how much better it just looked. So that was just one thing that jumped out to me right away. And again, they've been talking about even before Vanguard actually came out that there were going to be 20 maps at launch in Vanguard, and it was the most ever for a Call of Duty game at launch. And that 20 does include 4 of the Champion Hill maps, which is their new mode. So there's 16 traditional multiplayer maps available in Vanguard. And as I was kind of talking about in the Twitter chat earlier today, there's only like really a handful of maps that I just like I see and I don't want to play. Which leaves like 10 solid maps that I actually have enjoyed so far for the most part. So honestly, I really don't have a lot of complaints. I've played a lot of pubs so far. I'm already almost third prestige actually, which is kind of nuts. But I've enjoyed the game. I really like the MP40. That was again another might be nostalgia for me again, just because MP40 was one of my favorite guns from World at War. Now it's back again. It's a solid gun, so I've enjoyed using it. But kind of as we touched on earlier, the STG and Automaton are both pretty good ARs too, and I've enjoyed trying those out so far. So I haven't seen a lot. I mean, there have been some things where players have said certain guns already are overpowered. I think there was like a pistol. Trem was telling me about earlier, the 1911. I think he said was banned because with certain attachments, it was like a one-shot headshot for a pistol or a two-shot kill, not in the head. So certainly some kinks that we're gonna have to work out. But again, less than a week of the game being live, so I'm actually extremely optimistic about this game so far early on.
Our head Ego Chall correspondent, Trimmer, put in the chat, competitive side is meh. Game has potential to be better than MW for S&D for respawn prayers since no trophies and Flak Tac Ninja all perk 1. But I've been really enjoying something new. Game is great for casuals. London Docks comes in season 1. Bless up. Great reporting.
That is a good point. That is a good point too. Something obviously we didn't really talk about, but it was kind of big news. Was before launch and in beta, Ninja wasn't a perk, and then Sledgehammer announced that they were adding Ninja as a perk, which makes your footsteps silent always, which has been a big thing talked about in the past couple years with Dead Silence being a field upgrade instead of a perk. But as Tremor pointed out, the big problem is they put it in that perk 1 slot with I actually don't know. I think it's called
Flak and
Fortified.
Tac.
Yeah,
Oh.
but they're not called that in this game. But they are basically Flak and Tac. It's like Fortified and Survival Instincts or Survival Training, something like that. And it makes it makes it hard to balance out what you have to pick because all three of those perks are in that same slot, and there are no wild cards right now, so you can only pick one. Dead Silence does remain in the game as a field upgrade, so in my head, I feel like in Search, the pros might lean towards having Ninja and Deddy for Search, and then in Respawn, having Flak or Tack and Deddy as their field upgrade. But again, we'll have to see how they figure it out, and or maybe before competitive play starts, we might see like a perk realignment thing. We haven't seen that really since World War II, where they had that big mid-season system change. So yeah, like Trimmer pointed out, there definitely are some areas of concerns or some slight issues, tweaks that need to be made. So we'll see what happens. Gotta hope the dev team is on their toes and willing to balance stuff out, and we'll just have to see what happens.
I think that has literally been said about every Call of Duty ever. Um, yeah, I don't know. I know there were some perks banned in Black Ops 2, but I'm pretty sure that every perk slot was at least relevant at some point in time. So like you could realistically have three useful perks all at one time. But yeah, I don't have a lot of faith in that. Sledgehammer has been pretty good, I think, in terms of like competitive and whatnot. Like I think World War II is pretty good. And maybe if they come out with some ranked play and it's really, really good, like that kind of makes up for what, could go wrong or what people will be upset about. But, it's just very concerning when people say, well, hopefully the devs they're going to be watching out and they're going to fix things, and then you don't get a balancing patch for, a month and a half or 2 months. And I mean, maybe it'll be different this year, but it's just not a great look. I did see like a good suggestion, and I completely forget who it was. Maybe it was Adam Apicella or somebody that I follow on Twitter, but they were talking about how the CDL season should start like almost immediately after a game is launched, and that pros should be able to practice on like an early build or like the beta or whatever kind of build in the months preceding the launch. So they're practicing and they're getting used to the rule set that they're kind of developing with the dev team. And then when the game is launched, they can actually have a tournament very soon after, whatever the November 6th or whatever release date is, which I thought was interesting. We see it with Overwatch, which, Overwatch 2 or whatever, however that's going. It doesn't seem like it's going very well because they're pushing it back. But the thought process was the Overwatch League was going to play on an early build of Overwatch 2, a game that was not going to be released for several months after the Overwatch League season was set to begin, which in theory is a great idea because it builds up so much hype. Like casual fans that want to play Overwatch 2 or want to watch Overwatch 2, they can watch competitive and they can see what pro players are doing and they can see what kind of game they're getting into. I think something like that for Call of Duty, which obviously Activision Blizzard owns both Overwatch and the Call of Duty franchise, so it's not too unrealistic, but yeah, I don't think it'll happen, but I just thought it was a good idea from whoever I follow on Twitter that suggested it like maybe a week ago.
Yeah. I don't know. We did get earlier that I think it was last month that Treyarch and Sledgehammer were saying they are going to be working on ranked play. Let me pull it up real quick.
Heard that before though.
Well, this says it's coming in 2022, so they gave themselves a large window, which I think we were memeing about it. I don't think it was really, an actual thing on Twitter, but we were kind of memeing about that, like in 2022 means we get ranked play in August next year after the CDL season ends.
Yeah.
And
it gets announced during the grand finals of champs.
But Treyarch's tweet from October 29th was we're collaborating with our partners to bring competitive modes, ranked skill divisions, visible skill ratings, and new competitive rewards to Vanguard ranked play in 2022. More details to come. So, um, the big thing that a lot of people have been excited about is because Sledgehammer had that, like the MMR based um ranked play system in World War II that a lot of people seem to like. Um, Now it seems like it's possible we get something along those lines back next year. Obviously, the 2022 timeline is a little vague, and we'll just have to hope that we get something in early 2022. But we'll have to see what happens.
Yeah. Um, yeah, that's just, it's almost too vague that it makes me think it will literally drop right after the CDL season starts, and at that point, it's kind of already dead. Like, it's dead on arrival essentially if it comes out in March or April and the CDL season's already started. It's like, who's playing Call of Duty, 6 months after launch? Not a ton of people. Like, people will be playing Warzone at that point. Um, it's one of the most frustrating things as a Call of Duty fan. Like, I'm not gonna play the game, but I do like watching people play the game, and I like people being excited about the game. And if the CDL is to succeed, then it kind of needs the developers to be all in on it, and like, League Play kind of has to launch like on launch, because that makes the most sense, because competitive players have an outlet then, and you don't have to go to GBs and whatnot. But I mean, I'm just kind of ranting, but I'm just thinking, like, if it doesn't come in really early 2022, it is I wouldn't say pointless, but it's very kind of neutered. Like, the effectiveness of it is not great. So, we have anything else to talk about? We've been talking for about an hour now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is episode 30. We've done 30 episodes of the Ego Chall podcast. Um, don't know when the next episode will be. Maybe if, I don't know, maybe if Activision drops a huge patch or something and things drastically change in Vanguard, then we'll be back sooner than later. Or if a 12th team pops up or whatnot. But yeah, but thank you for watching. We really appreciate it. Don't know when episode 31 will be, but we'll keep you updated. Follow us on Twitter at Ego Chall Podcast. Bink's Twitter is at JBink with 2Ks. I'm at Presbyers. We'll just keep you updated on when we're doing podcasts. Subscribe or follow the podcast on whatever platform you're listening/watching on, whether that's YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, whatever. Make sure to give us a 5-star rating, and like all of the stuff that we're doing, because that makes us feel good. Yeah, that's about it. Take it away, Bink.
Yep. Thank you guys for tuning in, as always. Appreciate all the support, even if we did take that little hiatus when there wasn't really a lot to talk about. But you can look forward to hearing from Preston and I moving forward. Either, like you said, if some rosters get confirmed, we get a 12th team announcement, or just if anything is happening in Vanguard, or we finally get some news about when the 2022 season will officially start. So getting towards the end of 2021. Should have some more stuff to talk about moving forward. And if you want to hear us talk about some competitive Call of Duty, you know where to find us. So thanks as always for tuning in. And remember to send the chow.